Hello everyone, on behalf of iland and all of our partners everywhere, I'd like to welcome you to this on-demand webinar, Defense and Recovery in the Age of Ransomware, the two sides of data protection. Now, a lot of times when you hear the words data protection, depending on which side of the fence you're on, you may be a security person, you may be a data protection and recovery person, and it means different things to different people. But the reality of it is, whether you're talking about security, whether you're talking about defense in depth, whether you're talking about backup or IT resilience, you need to focus on all of these things, and all of this counts as data protection when it comes to ransomware and other events that could potentially damage your data. Now, obviously, with everything that's going on in the world, the last thing you want to have to worry about is ransomware, crypto lockers, cyber crimes, cyber leaks, everything like that. But the reality of it is you can't open the news without seeing a headline every single day about some sort of computer event that is causing issues to large organizations. And this is not even taken into account smaller organizations that may or may not even be reporting some of the outages and challenges that they're having. Quite frankly, it's pretty scary out there. And the reality is cyber criminals are getting smarter. The landscape of the threats are more frequent and more sophisticated. There's even ransomware as a service that's being offered by criminal organizations, making it much easier for almost anyone to get a hold of this nefarious software to cripple businesses. We have a lot of statistics from 2017 and 2018, and 2019 is just coming out, but all of those numbers are even worse, and it's going to continue into 2020. You can see that the rise of breaches year over year is climbing exponentially. And over the past 5 years, you've had almost 67% rise in security breaches. And then when we talk to business leaders, they talk about new business models are introducing new technology vulnerabilities as more and more organizations are leveraging SaaS models and cloud-based models and mobile user technologies. All of these different attack vectors start to show up as new ways for criminals to affect your organization's data. And then the cost of dealing with cyber attacks is at record levels. Again, these are older numbers as the 2019 numbers are starting to be finalized, and we know 2020 is going to continue to grow, but disruption and data loss spend are becoming disproportionate to other IT spend. When you have to spend more on recovering data or protecting the data rather than innovating your IT organizations to deliver value to the business, that changes a lot of how IT is able to function and provide the things that they do for the business. And the sad truth is cybercrime is big business for the bad guys, so it's getting a lot of attention. Europol, the European Union-wide intelligence network, has warned that the global impact of cybercrime has risen to $3 trillion. So it's more profitable for the bad guys to do cybercrime and ransomware and collect in bitcoins and other ransomware type payments than it is for them to trade in marijuana, cocaine, and heroin combined. Those are staggering numbers, and it's pretty scary as you start to hear about more and more organizations creating these ransomware as a service, where a nefarious organization will create ransomware and then they will sell that to other nefarious organizations, and then they take a cut based on the amount of money that comes in. So now almost any cyber criminal can engage in these things and just hope they get lucky and make payday. Not only is it big business for the bad guys, but cyber insurance costs are skyrocketing because more and more insurance companies are making their policyholders prove that they have a plan in place to recover data or at least to mitigate some of the damage. Because as more and more organizations are being hit and more of these claims are coming in, insurance companies are realizing that the cybersecurity and cyber insurance plans that they have in place are not adequate to recover financially all of the money that is lost due to some of these things. And while we're focusing on ransomware, crypto lockers, the things that encrypt your data and make you pay a ransom, there's a lot more stuff going on out there. There's sniffers and keyloggers and data miners that kind of sit in the background and do things without you actually knowing. When you think about a crypto locker event, the data is locked, it's encrypted, and you get an alert saying, hey, you need to pay us money. But if you have some way to protect against that or to recover against that, and we'll talk about that later, you may not pay these organizations the money that they're asking. So more and more organizations are still using that, but now they're starting to look at things like sniffers and keyloggers and trying to get that data kind of in the background without you knowing that they're there, and then reselling that information. And then they'll lock you out. So now they have multiple ways to try to get money out of you or to leverage your data to receive sums of money. Data miners are becoming more popular because what you can do is install these crypto coin mining softwares inside organizations, leveraging their spare cycles. And if nobody notices it, it's just a trickle effect. And over thousands of different computers and servers and different organizations, they can continue to make money and then eventually lock you out and make you pay a ransom as well. So they're attacking you with so many different ways and so many different techniques that you can't just say, oh, I'm prepared for ransomware, here's what I'm going to do. There's a lot of stuff going on out there, and you need to have a full comprehensive security and recovery solution in place. And that sort of brings up the entire thing we're talking about. Defense in depth and IT resilience are key to this solution. Now, why is this such a big deal? Well, obviously your data is your lifeblood and it needs to be protected, and everybody knows this. You can always reinstall software, you can always buy new hardware, you can always do that kind of stuff, but your data that runs your organization, your personal data for your customers, your sales orders, everything that makes your business what it is, without it, your business cannot run. And while we're focusing on ransomware, there's a lot of reasons why all of these techniques can protect you from a myriad of data outages. For example, service availability. Whether or not it's ransomware, whether or not it's a hurricane, whether or not it's no power to the servers, just having availability to access your data is important. Whether you've lost it or not, if you can't access it, you're still kind of in the same spot. Another thing is accidental deletion and human error. These things happen. Sometimes something gets mistakenly removed, or sometimes a person will delete something that needs to be restored later on. That happens all the time in IT. And it may not be as disastrous as a CryptoLocker event locking out your entire share drive, but still, it can cost money to recover that data, or if you can't find that data later. And of course, we're really talking about external threats such as ransomware, CryptoLockers, security breaches, stuff like that. And that really plays into all of this data protection, IT resilience, defense in depth strategies that we're going to talk about. But that's just one piece of it. The good thing is all of these techniques can be used to protect all of your data from multiple different things. We hate to think about it, but internal threats are still a thing. Malicious insiders, disgruntled employees, all of the reasons why you hear those horror stories in IT about somebody leaving and taking data or deleting stuff on the way out, it still happens, and these same techniques can protect against that as well. Another thing that people really don't think about when it talks about data protection is really policy gaps and long-term archival. If you have a user who has done something over the last 5 or 6 years for the organization and they leave and it's been 3 or 4 years and then something comes along, maybe it's a patent suit, or maybe it's a legal issue or a legal hold or some sort of e-discovery, all of a sudden those long-term archival gaps become important for saving or defending the organization against any number of things. And finally, when it comes to legal and compliance and regulatory rules, sometimes you just have to prove that you have these data protection policies in place because it's the law and you can be fined if you don't. Whether it's internal or external audits, you need to prove that you are following the compliance regulations according to your business, and all of these strategies can not only help with everything else, but can also help you there. So why do we do this? The tangible cost of an outage. You can say, how much is it going to cost me per hour if I'm not taking orders, or if I can't manufacture my product, or if I can't get my message out to the market? But what about the intangible costs? What is the perception of your internal and external customers if someone can't reach you? They can't reach their data, they can't reach their information, they can't purchase something for you. The other thing is loyalty. If someone sees your name in a headline about a data breach or CryptoLocker or having to pay ransomware, where's the loyalty that they're going to have when it comes to continuing their service or their business with you? And then finally, confidence. Whether it's internal confidence, whether it's external confidence, confidence in the marketplace. Those things are very hard to get a cost analysis on, but they can impact your organization greatly. When you think about how you do your personal business, if something happens and somebody loses your data or they screw up somehow, what are the things that you're going to do along these lines of perception, loyalty, and confidence? Chances are you're going to go somewhere else, and your customers are going to do the same thing if something happens and you can't recover. But it's not all bad news. There was a State of the Channel ransomware report a couple of years ago that said 96% of companies with a trusted backup and disaster recovery plan were able to survive ransomware attacks. So let's talk about all of that: data protection, defense in depth. Really, it's all about this multi-layer approach to security and data protection. And it really starts with defending your data. A lot of times as a backup person, we talk about data protection as the taking a backup and recovering it. But that's only one part of data protection. Protecting your data creates this whole defense in depth idea about protecting access to the data to begin with, before you have to worry about recovering the data if something gets past that. And you can see here, there's a giant onion of different layers, and all of these different layers have to be protected. We'll talk a little bit about some of them, but when you think about policies, procedures, and awareness, that's probably the number one key shortage in almost every organization. You can have software, you can have policies in place, but sometimes it just comes down to a mistake or human error, and the bad guys can do something nefarious and cause sorts of issues. Beyond that, you start looking at the actual infrastructure, the physical security, the network stack, the server stack, the applications, and ultimately the data stack. How do you protect people from getting to the data when they shouldn't have access to it, or protecting that data from someone doing something to it? We jokingly talk about the onion and peeling the onion and all the layers, but it really is true, and all of those layers are important. And so here's just a couple of examples of some of the things that you need to do across the entire stack to protect that data, to protect that infrastructure, long before it comes to, do you have a backup, or can you bring your organization online in the cloud to continue running business? Before that happens, you need to have that defense in depth and protect that information. When it comes to policies, procedures, and awareness, the human factor is real. There will always be the human factor. There will always be new people coming in. There will always be reoccurring training. So you have to continuously update your policies, your procedures, and always have awareness throughout your organization about all the stuff that goes on. When you start moving to a remote workforce, it becomes even more challenging, because it's very easy when you're sitting at home in your pajamas working at night to not think that you're doing work when you're really doing work, potentially on even company assets. So different training, different awareness techniques are all important. When you think about phishing and how nefarious organizations are out there trying to get a way to just get into your organization, there are so many different ways and so many different social hacking and crazy stories out there about how somebody will go through LinkedIn and find a person and then call someone that they work with and impersonate them. And then finally, eventually, they somehow get access to information, whether it's financial or personal, that they shouldn't have had. All it takes is one mistake. And so you have to consistently remind your users about these types of phishing and social hacking attempts. Ransomware awareness is huge. One of the biggest things is you want to make sure that your users don't feel like they're going to get in trouble if they make a mistake. They need to know that if something happens, you accidentally clicked on a link because you've got 20 different windows open, or it looked like it came from your bank, but it really wasn't. As soon as something happens, they need to have an understanding that immediately reach out to the proper security organization or InfoSec team inside the organization, and that they're not going to get in trouble, because they don't want them to hide the information. You don't want them to feel like they can't come forward and say, oh, you know what? I was really busy. I had 10 things open. I clicked something I shouldn't have. What can we do? The sooner you know, the sooner they understand what potentially could happen, the easier it is to contain. Compliance training is usually thought of as a kind of a funny once-a-year thing, but it really is important to continue to showcase to your users the things that they need to understand from a compliance perspective. What is personally identifiable information or personal health information? What is considered financial information or, secure for your eyes only information? These are all things that consistently have to be reminded, because the last thing you want is someone to leverage phishing and social hacking and all this stuff and get through all of those different stages that you've tried to protect yourself of, and then have somebody give away something that they shouldn't have, whether it's personal information, financial information, or just information about the company that shouldn't be public, right? So always understanding your compliance information, understanding the compliance rules and regulations that you as a company are under, and the things that you could actually be fined for, is just as important as understanding how somebody is trying to get your data and get your information from, say, like emails or social media and that kind of stuff. Having a constant reminder, while it seems daunting and while sometimes it seems overbearing, it is so necessary. Especially if InfoSec or the compliance team sees something come in, they can use that as a reminder to say, hey, look, this is something that came from the president of the company. You can see the misspellings. You can see this link doesn't reflect our actual domain name. These are all the different things that we were able to spot from this one email or one social media ad or whatever. This is an example of a person trying to get information for you. Here are things to think about. Here are things to look out for. And here's a reminder on your training. And continue to remind your users, continue to remind them across everything that they do, especially as we move to a remote workforce environment, that everything that they do that touches the company assets can potentially cause issues. We'll talk about a research study that was done with USB keys, but when you think about all of the different places that you can go on the internet, they're not all safe, right? And it becomes very easy for a person to just accidentally go to the wrong place, whether it's because of a pop-up, because of it's a link or whatever, and that can start to spiral things down. Obviously, there are web filtering software pieces that are out there that can be used to help. But again, if you have a user who's working late at night, they're at home, they're on their personal internet, what are the things that are protecting your organization's data when something like that happens? So being able to continually remind your users what they need to focus on, what they need to be aware of, and how they conduct business with company assets is very, very important. And that's all just policies, procedures, and awareness. That's literally the outside ring of this entire stack of the onion. So it's so important to have an understanding of all the things that are out there. And it becomes very challenging for organizations to keep up with this, but it's so important to do so. I'll kind of briefly touch upon some of these other things, but there's a whole slew of information out there on ways that you can protect your organization across the entire stack. When you talk about physical security, this comes to play with everything from building security, do you have badge access? Are there cameras? Making sure that one person doesn't open up the door and let 5 people in, whether or not they're badged or not, making sure that only restrictive access is being used for certain locations. Everybody in the business shouldn't have access to the server room or to the network closet, even financial information where it may be stored in paper form or software form. When you talk about network security, obviously everybody knows about firewalls and VLANs and segmentation, but you really have to understand that when it comes to IT and when it comes to people trying to do their job, they're going to focus on, I want to get my job done. And if I'm being hampered for some reason, maybe because that person's not part of the same security group, so I can't share a file with them, I'm going to find a way to give them that file, or I'm going to find a way to get that information that I need to do my job. So IT has to have a understanding and cooperation with users to say, no, we're not going to implement any sort of shadow IT. We're not going to use Dropbox to share files because you couldn't share them within the organization. We're not going to grab a USB stick and give somebody something that has potentially sensitive information on it that could then get lost later on. So understanding how data is trafficking along your organization is very important, just like having firewall rules and VLANs and having a secure network and an unsecure network and all of that stuff. And then when you even get to cloud type stuff, how do you manage and maintain the permissions across your organization now in the cloud? That's where IAM or identity access management really comes into play. You don't want to have one username for all of your SaaS-based offerings. You want to have a username for every single person that is accessing it, and you want to keep restrictive roles and responsibilities based on what they're allowed to see and what they're allowed to do. Server security is just as important. Application security is just as important. I'll kind of lump those two together, but making sure you don't have a single administrator username that 15 people know is paramount. And you still hear about these stories where, everybody in the organization, because they're small, they just have a single username and password to do all of the work. Well, now you don't have auditing. Now you don't know what's being done. Now you don't know who's responsible. And ultimately, that one piece of information could get out and you can't close it down or you can't lock it down. And now it becomes a security issue or security breach. When it comes to application security, segmentation of sensitive information is super important. If you have a file share and everybody in the organization is using it, and you have your finance department putting stuff in a folder, and you have your executives putting stuff in a folder, and then you have your workforce putting stuff in a folder, if something happens and they can all see it, even if they can see the folder name, imagine if you're getting ready to go public and all of a sudden you have a folder that says going public information, and it can be seen while they may not be able to click into the folder. If they see that information, again, you've created a breach of data and you've exposed sensitive information. Let alone if you're regulated and you start talking about HIPAA or healthcare or PCI DSS and financial informations, all of that information has to be secured properly, or there could be actual fines to your organization. And finally, the actual data itself. Data security is just as important. When you talk about encryption in rest, encryption in flight, you want to make sure that somebody can't just walk out with a hard drive or walk out with a server and be able to just access all the data. There's all kinds of encryption software out there for both laptops or even mobile devices on your storage area networks or anything like that, as well as encryption of the data itself. And again, restricted access I talked a little bit about, but making sure that people can't just open up every single folder and see all of the other different folders that are available. Whether or not they can double click the file, if you can find a folder that has sensitive information, it gets people to think, it gets people to talk and start digging around probably where they shouldn't. Data categorization is huge because there is some information that is internal only. There's some data that's classified. There's some data that is public. And you have to have a data categorization and classification system in place so that you know and your users know what they can share and what they can't share. A lot of times you'll share out an email that says, hey, this information is confidential, but then include an attachment. And inside the attachment, there's nothing that says it's confidential. So eventually that data gets out. You have to make sure that the data itself is categorized and know where it is, who's accessing it, who owns the data, and make sure that everything is traceable and auditable in case something happens. Now, that was a lot of information, and thankfully there's a lot of government organizations out there that can help you have a better understanding about this entire data lifecycle for data protection and data security. One good organization is NIST.gov. They have an entire circular idea where you identify, you protect, you detect, you respond, you recover, and then you continue to do this. And this is good for ransomware. This is good for security breaches. There's a lot of good information in addition to all the things I just covered that can help you prepare your organizations from an InfoSec perspective all the way into, how do I protect my actual users' data or my personally identifiable information or personal health information or finance information. There's a ton of information out there. What I gave were some examples, some best practices, some sort of ground-based ideas, but there's so much more that you can do and should do to protect your organization. Now, once you've done all the defending, you can't stop there. Now you have to focus on protection and recovery, because the reality of it is there are so many different layers, there are so many different things. All it takes is one mistake or one thing to get through, and you could have a ransomware attack. You could have a CryptoLocker attack. You could have some sort of issue. And honestly, these same strategies also work when it comes to things like a power outage or a hardware failure or a natural disaster. So you have to have this multi-layered protection scheme of defense in depth and recovery and resilience. And so now let's talk about recovery and resilience. So, there's this idea of the 3-2-1 rule of data availability. And it really talks about having 3 copies of your data, your production copy, which you're accessing, and then an additional 2 copies. And you want them on 2 different media types, even for local backup. And that's really important because when you think about it, let's say you're talking about a storage area network. If you have all of your production data and then you also have your backup to disks on the same storage area network, if something happens, a power failure, access to the disks fail, some sort of hardware fault, you've now lost 2 copies of that data, right? So you want to make sure that you have your data and your secondary copy on a different media type. And then finally, you want to have one offsite copy. Now, traditionally, these have always been, backup to tape and put the tape on a truck and put the truck in a warehouse sort of thing. But cloud has really change the model because it gives you instant access to it. It gives you encrypted in flight and at rest. It gives you accessibility that you may not have had. And when you start thinking about hardware agnostic cloud availability, not having to worry about, do I have the same tape drive that I did from 2 years ago when I have to recover this data for legal hold? How do I actually get a hold of that tape? How do I find that tape? Those kind of things. Cloud really offers you a new way to protect and to offsite and air gap that third copy to protect it. So at iland, we talk about building a broader data protection and recovery solution. Just like there's multiple layers to the onion for security and defense, there's multiple layers to data protection, recovery, and IT resilience. It starts with secure cloud backup, and that allows you to create a backup locally and then create a copy of that backup and send it to the cloud. That way, no matter what happens locally, you still have that third offsite air-gapped copy of your backup. Additionally, with the rising popularity of object storage, we have the ability for you to leverage object storage, and that can be used for copy mode, for, again, a copy version of that local backup, or even use it as an elastic cloud-based repository for additional space, for long-term archives, anything like that. We'll talk a little bit about disaster recovery, but really the next piece of that is about IT resilience. Being able to recover files is one thing, but being able to recover your business is another, and they are two separate things, and we'll talk about that. And then finally, as more and more organizations are leveraging SaaS-based applications like Office 365 for email and file share and SharePoint and those kind of things, there's a level of data recovery and protection that needs to be applied to those as well. Just because your email is no longer on site doesn't mean you have to have the same level of protection and recovery options that you did when it was on site. Now, all of these solutions are provided by the iland and Veeam partnership, and it's all maintained and controlled in the cloud with the iland Secure Cloud Console. And we've got a lot more information about that coming up, but really the idea being that one single solution can actually offer all of these different protection options for you, and you can manage it and view it all from a single pane of glass. So let's talk a little bit about ransomware. Now, all of these techniques are good for everything, whether it's a natural disaster, whether it's compliance and regulatory needs, whether it's power outages, whatever. A lot of times, though, the ransomware really kind of hits home hardest because that's the thing that's going to instantly lock you out of your data or cause you some issues. So let's talk a little bit about ransomware, some things that you can do to protect your organization, and how some of these recovery and resilience options can help you if this ransomware gets past all the defense stuff we talked about earlier. So there's a bunch of different ransomware strains out there, and a lot of them, they've got different names, they've got different nomenclatures, and so there's a lot of things to look out for. You can't really focus on a single individual one, but really what's important to think about is how they're affecting users and how they're affecting data centers. You know, the Repsin distributes itself through spam email campaign. So what happens is somehow it'll infect the victim, and then the victim's emails will go out continually broadcasting that ransomware so that it looks like it's a trusted source that it's coming from. So that's how it can propagate very quickly, because you see that the email is from so-and-so that you already know, and sometimes you just don't pay attention. You're in the middle of 50 different things. You see that it's from your colleague or your coworker or even friend or family, and it's really easy to click on something thinking that they're a trusted source, and now you're infected, and then it's going to start propagating itself through you. There's a bunch of different ransomware strains that will scan not only your public, but also your internal network for RDP sessions or open ports, and will actually leverage different techniques to get inside the systems and then infect other parts of the organization, and can actually use other networking protocols to propagate itself. So it doesn't worry about whether or not it's being emailed to a friend if it can get access to the network and go spreading itself around. Ryuk is one that, while targeting high enterprise companies and encrypting all their data, and those are usually some of the ones that you see on the headlines, honestly, at this point in time, with all of the ransomware as a service, any organization can be affected. It doesn't matter what size business you are. If that pop-up comes up and says, hey, all of your data is encrypted, you need to go ahead and pay us, there's challenges for that organization. One that we've seen recently is WannaCry, which exploits a defect in Microsoft's implementation of the SMB protocol, which can be used a lot of times for file sharing and sync drives. A lot of times, a lot of these things have been fixed, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But if you have older systems or you have systems that are no longer being updated or patched or even out of warranty, sometimes some of these things can get through and cause all sorts of issues. And a lot of times these things are spread through a variety of infection methods. USB sticks are very, very popular for infection. Because how many times have you found a USB stick on your desk and been like, I can't remember what's on this. Let me go ahead and plug it in and see. Oh yeah, that's my PowerPoint presentation from a year ago that I needed to bring to the presentation computer, right? But what if it's not? What if it's encrypted with malware or there's some sort of issue on it and now you're introducing malware or issues into your organization that you didn't know? For example, there was a study by Google and some universities where they would just put USB sticks in parking lots and public places, and they were able to find that 50% of them, over half of them, were being plugged into computers for people just to see what they were on there. A lot of times, most people won't accept USB sticks from trade shows or from organizations that get mailed to them. A lot of times people would send out USB sticks with their brochure and saying, hey, instead of taking this 400-page catalog, here's a USB stick. It's got our logo on it. It's really cool. And it also has our full PDF catalog on there. Well, nowadays, most people aren't trusting that, right? So you have to think about how you're distributing information, but also what's coming to you. And a lot of times it's not the user that's giving you the removable media, it's where the removable media originated from. Security analysts have found hidden ransomware and malware and Trojans in USB sticks that are coming from manufacturers that are sent to other manufacturers who put their logo on it and then send them to another manufacturer who put their data on there and then send them that. So it's very, very suspicious, and there's a lot of challenges with removable media. A lot of IT teams are actually forbidding removable media. They'll actually turn it off in all of their operating systems so that you can't actually plug in a USB stick and see what's on there. There's no removable drives, there's no USB sticks on laptops, all of that stuff. Another common infection method that you've probably seen a lot on social media is just malvertising. So putting malware in ads that pop up all the time. I mean, we're so used to ads in everything we do. You go to a news website, you go to a reputable source, and they can't always verify that the ad that's coming up isn't redirecting to somewhere malicious. And so you may see something and say, oh, hey, that's kind of interesting. Click on it, and then now you've infected your computer, infected your organization, everything like that. Social media, SMS, how many times a day do you get random spam messages on either your phone or your social media? And now all it takes is one accidental click or one accidental touch, and now all of a sudden you could infect stuff. And recently with some of the things that have happened with COVID-19 and some of the things that we see there, the malicious organizations are actually embedding malicious code into things like news reports around what's going on in the world. So you have this huge global pandemic happening, and you have people who are trying to find out more information, and unfortunately, the bad actors of the world are taking advantage of that, and you may or may not be going to some place that's trusted and reputable because you want to find out information to protect your family, protect your organization, and now all of a sudden you're actually doing worse harm by infecting your organization with some sort of ransomware, Trojan, malware, etc. And when it comes to ransomware, there's just no single silver bullet, right? You have to keep all your software up to date. And it's amazing how often you hear about these stories where, an entire municipality is shut down due to ransomware, and they don't have backups, and their software is 4 years out of date, and they haven't patched a single thing, even though the fix has been out for a year. Malicious users and ransomware writers, they know these things. They know that there are people who aren't keeping up to date. And so all it takes, there's a lot of day one and day zero vulnerabilities, sure, but there's a lot more that's found years later and protected and fixed and patched. But the hope is that somebody doesn't fix that, glaring loophole or that one port issue or whatever, and that's how they can attack you and get in. You have to perform a threat analysis with your security team, whether you're a one-person IT shop or a 400-person IT shop, whether you have a dedicated InfoSec team or a CISO team or not. You need to have an understanding of where are all the potential challenges, where are all the potential breaches, and what can you do to protect your entire organization. You have to train your staff on cybersecurity practices. It's not the most thrilling stuff to talk about in the world, but if you have an understanding and if your staff has an understanding and they can propagate that information to your end users, all of that helps. Every single bit of knowledge helps keep your organization safe. And you have to back up everything at least once a day. There's the time for weekly backups and just waiting till the end of the week is gone. You have to back up your information every single day, and you have to have multiple points in time of this backup. You have to have multiple different mediums that this backup is on, because you never know what could happen and you never know which piece of data you need to recover from. There are times when there's malware or ransomware that sits there for weeks or days or months, and you need to be able to know that you have multiple copies of your data to be able to go back to. Just replicating your data isn't enough, because if you have bad stuff on one side and you just mirror it to the other side, now you have bad stuff in two places, right? It doesn't count. You have to have backup, you have to have IT resilience, and you need to send one of those copies off site, because there's any number of things. There's ransomware out there now that looks for commonly used extensions from backup software. So if you have an F drive or an L drive and you're doing backups to disk, and that same system has access to that L drive or F drive, all it's going to do is encrypt your backups. So you have to be able to have an offsite, air-gapped, secure, encrypted version of your data somewhere else that can't be impacted. At iland with Veeam, we offer Iland Secure Backup as a service. And so what this does is it allows you to meet that 3-2-1 rule of availability with that one copy off-site, leveraging cloud-based storage. The benefits are it's hardware agnostic. You don't have to worry about in a year, did you upgrade your tape drives and now you can't find the right hardware. You don't have to worry about recovering physical medium from some location. Was the humidity okay in that data center? Or was it stored in a box that is no longer accessible? Or was the medium actually damaged? So being able to leverage the Veeam software to create local backups for multiple protection points and then create copies of that, send them offsite in an encrypted in-flight and at-rest tunnel to the cloud for immediate access and availability is super important. Now, you hate to think that there's any time a malicious user, a lot of times we're talking about ransomware and ransomware encrypting backups or encrypting files and leveraging backups to recover. But sometimes there are malicious users in addition. And so the last thing you want to have is a malicious user come in, delete or encrypt local data, and then have accessibility to their cloud or offsite backups and be able to delete or encrypt those as well. So there's another offering called Insider Protection. And what this does is this is almost like a recycle bin or a secondary copy of any data that is destroyed in the cloud that can only be accessed by the cloud provider. So let's say there's a malicious user and he or she comes in, deletes all the local data, deletes all the backups, goes to the cloud console, deletes all the cloud backups. Normally, at that point, you would have no data, right? But with Insider Protection, there's a secondary copy of that deleted backup stored only in the iland cloud that can only be accessed by the iland security team. So what this allows the organization to do is understand what's going on, be able to recover that after all of the other stuff has happened, and you still have a copy of your data. So it prevents against some of that malicious users or even accidental deletion, which is probably less likely, but more about the malicious use case. And we talked earlier about how more and more organizations are leveraging Office 365 because, it's so much easier to just leverage a SaaS-based application for emails and file shares and SharePoints and that kind of stuff. And so the challenge comes from understanding where the gap in policy and retention is from what's being presented to you from Office 365 and what your organization requires. So for example, if you have a user who leaves the organization and their user is deleted, that data may or may not exist a year from now if something happens like a legal hold or a request. So these are understandings that you have to have, and Iland can help you have an understanding of, where is that policy gap? Where is the gap in your understanding of what is protected versus what's actually being protected? And how can the Veeam solution protect that data and allow for you to recover files either back to the cloud or to another location, or even securely so that you can do some sort of legal hold or anything like that if you need to. Another benefit is there's a direct iland to Office 365 connection. So this isn't going through your organization. So even if your organization is down, your remote users, your mobile users can still access their email, they can still access their files and their SharePoint, and it can still be backed up because it doesn't go through your organization's network. And with an all-inclusive per-user licensing, it just makes it simple. It makes it simple to back up. It makes it simple to keep long-term retention of this data that's necessary. But honestly, backups are not enough. True IT resilience lies in the ability to quickly recover your organization. When you think about all of the things we just talked about, whether it's ransomware, whether it's malware, whether it's power issues or natural disasters or whatever it is, any sort of data outage event can be very detrimental to your organization. But there are times when you just can't recover to something. You have your backups, and that's great. You have to do that. Like I said earlier, you have to back up at least daily. You need to have multiple copies of your backups. But what happens if there's a power outage? What happens if there's a natural disaster? What happens if there's a global pandemic and you can't get to your data center to recover something? You need to be able to bring your organization's workloads and assets and applications online quickly to continue your business. If ransomware shuts down your entire organization and it's going to take you 5 days to recover from a backup or restore, or maybe there's a hardware fault and now you've got to wait for hardware to show up and get racked and stacked and reinstalled and all that, that's downtime. It doesn't matter that you have the data. If your organization or your customers or your users can't access it, you're still down. That's still an outage. So having IT resilience and the ability to recover your organization quickly is super important. But DR has always been easier to say than to do, right? It's always been a challenge. And, when you think about disaster recovery for an entire data center and, having to purchase additional hardware and having a secondary site and rack and stack and cooling and power and all of that stuff, it has always been one of the hardest things for organizations, and it's usually the first thing that organizations drop. They know they need disaster recovery. They know they need IT resilience, but the cost, the complexity, the manpower, everything is just so much that organizations haven't been able to implement it. You add to that the fact that testing it can be challenging. Like what do? Do you turn off everything one morning and then you bring it up on the other location and just hope everything works? What does that do for your organization's downtime? How does that not impact what you're trying to do when you're in a 24/7 organization? So all of those things have always been a challenge for disaster recovery. But the good thing is disaster recovery as a service using cloud-based solutions offers a new path forward. One of the greatest things about cloud-based disaster recovery as a service is you don't have to go purchase additional hardware. You're not buying double the hardware just in case. You're not going and finding a secondary data center that's within X amount of latency so that you can replicate to, but still not in the same hurricane zone or flood zone or any of those things. You're making sure that you don't have to worry about having additional staff, additional power and cooling, a rack and stack, and all that stuff. There's no upfront capital expenses. Cloud has introduced a new cost model that leverages the ability for you to pay what you use and pay as you need and pay as you scale. So now all of a sudden, disaster recovery as a service enables IT resilience for any size organization. It provides geographic redundancy because no longer are you worried about, does the data center exist in another location? Do I have data sovereignty, or can I cross different geographic lines, etc.? All that stuff is taken care of by the cloud provider. The ability to schedule testing at any time without causing disruption is huge, as virtualization and encapsulation has really advanced not only the data center, but also disaster recovery. You now have the ability to run a test on a Tuesday afternoon, get a report and show it to somebody and say, look, our disaster recovery is going to work. Our IT resilience plan is going to work. Now, with that being said, it's very easy to replicate virtual machines. What's very difficult is when you start thinking about the automation and orchestration of these. So the Iland Secure Cloud Disaster Recovery as a Service comes with a full runbook for automation and orchestration, including reporting. So it's very easy to say, I've got 10 virtual machines, I need to power them up in this order and just do it by hand. That's not so easy when you have 1,500 virtual machines and you have multiple different organizations across the world all leveraging this technology. So now you have to orchestrate, you have to automate, and you have to test and test and test to maintain confidence that your recovery is going to work. And as things change, you have to add them to these test plans and you have to add them into the orchestration and recovery plans so that you can continue to verify and make sure that no matter what happens, whether it's a partial site failover, whether it's a full site failover, whether it's ransomware, whether it's a global outage, whether it's a hurricane, whatever happens, you know that you have multiple different solutions to move forward and protect your data and to bring it online. Iland is a VMware-based global cloud service provider, and we've been doing this for a very long time. With over 25 years delivering IT services, Over 12 years in the cloud and disaster recovery arena, we can help you. We've seen so many different solutions, we've seen so many different organizations, and we've helped them all. We've gotten numerous industry awards. One of the ones we're most proud of is leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant for Disaster Recovery as a Service the last 4 years. We can help you automate and implement a disaster recovery as a service solution to give you the confidence that no matter what happens, whether it's ransomware, natural disaster, power outage, whatever, you will be able to recover your business in the cloud quickly and efficiently and continue to do business. At Iland, we have a complete comprehensive compliance team on site, as well as numerous attestations and certifications for our global business partners. This allows you to understand what security compliance initiatives we are following and make sure that it complies with what you're trying to do, whether you're regulated or not. You can reach out to us at any time and talk to our compliance specialist to have a better understanding for your particular vertical needs or any compliance questions you have. And with that, I want to thank everybody on behalf of Iland and all of our partners everywhere for joining us on this webinar around defense and recovery in the age of ransomware, the two sides of data protection. Remember, you can't just have backup, you can't just have security, you can't just have firewall. You need the entire suite of defense in depth plus recovery and resilience to fully protect your organization. Find out more information at iland.com/free to sign up for a variety of our test drives. You can also find out more information on our YouTube channel, and we hope to talk to you soon. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day.